Okay. We're good to go.
Good. Okay, so it's November 23rd, and tonight we're going to do the second part of our discussion about Shabbos and pregnancy, Shabbos and fertility. There are three basic topics that I'm going to initiate. One is the trip to the hospital, which we have talked about previously, but I'm going to talk about and ask about the different participants on the trip on the way to the hospital. Then I'm going to just talk or ask briefly about the unprepared frum couple in the hospital on Shabbos. They didn't expect to be there. They got there. They're not ready to be there. They hardly have anything with them. They got stuck. They were going over for 5 minutes Erev Shabbos and were surely leaving, but ended up not leaving. And then I'm going to turn to some discussion about fertility issues and treatments on Shabbos. Okay. With that, it's the first part I'm going to call to the hospital. If our patient figures out she's in labor, maybe she figures out she broke her water, and now it's time to go to the hospital. It's Shabbos. So we talked about a little bit previous, but what gives permission to the patient, to the woman herself, to travel to the hospital on Shabbos when she knows labor is coming? Maybe it's not in full force yet, in preparation to give birth.
Yeah. So as we discussed last time, and we're going to have to refresh our memories. We discussed different statuses of a person on Shabbos or in general, and how that relates to Shabbos. There's chole she'ein bo sakana, people who are they're sick or they're in some type of medical situation, but it's not life-threatening. And for such a situation, it wouldn't justify breaking Shabbos on a d'oraisa level, like driving in a car, for instance. However, if you have someone who is in a medical situation, in a medical emergency where life is in danger, that's what's called the chole sheyesh bo sakana. And the chole sheyesh bo sakana, we could use the classic term of pikuach nefesh, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. So that would tell us, that halacha of pikuach nefesh would tell us that you're even allowed to break Shabbos on a d'oraisa. Shabbos can be completely dismissed, ignored, marginalized in a case of sakana where we need to save the life of the mother or of the fetus. Therefore, the Gemara assumes, even though, I'm afraid to ask you, Dr. Herman, because first of all, it has nothing to do with you, but I'll ask a stat in general. In America, in 2022, how many women die in childbirth?
I'll tell you this, that the tagline today is that of all the industrialized nations in the world, the United States has the highest mortality rate of any industrialized nation. Wow. It's still very rare to die in childbirth today, especially if you take away those who you have a suspicion will die. Those who are very ill when they're pregnant for whatever reason or have a special status. But when you take the average healthy young person, the chance that they're going to die in childbirth or after childbirth, which is actually more common than in childbirth itself, is at a very, very, very minute level.
Right. That being said,
significant because one death is too many. But if you look statistically and said it's 1 in 100,000, 1 in a few 100,000, that doesn't sound like much, but we consider that much today.
Yeah. Even if it's one and many thousands, nevertheless, when it comes to Hilchos Shabbos, they're still called the chole sheyesh bo sakana. And therefore, since they're called a chole sheyesh bo sakana, we're allowed to break Shabbos in order that patient should get to the hospital and should have access to the best medical care. We discussed last time that maybe if it could be done through a non-Jew driving the car, So then maybe that would be better than a Jewish person driving the car, unless there's no option, right? Unless you have no non-Jewish person to drive you to the hospital. Parenthetically, are we going to speak about taking a cab, or we spoke about that last time?
We spoke about, we talked about Uber is better than your husband, and that's better than Hatzalah for non-emergent trips to the hospital.
I'll just share with you something that happened this past week. One of my balabatim had to be in the hospital over Shabbos, and he said that he has a very good friend, a very good friend locally, who's non-Jewish, who said, "I'm happy to drive you on Shabbos, no problem. Just give me a call. I'll pick you up. I'll drive you home. I'll drive you to the hospital if you need to go in on Shabbos morning." And he asked me, is it better to use Uber, or if he has a non-Jewish friend who's willing to drive him, should he call his non-Jewish friend? I thought that the non-Jewish friend would be better than Uber, because Uber, a transaction has to take place. Although you're not handling money, but the acquisition takes place on Shabbos. Maso Matan, doing business on Shabbos is, it's only an issue, it's an issue drabanan, but it's still an issue. We don't do business on Shabbos. Gzeira Shema Yichtov, we don't want you to come to write. So the Rabbanim answered business on Shabbos. They forbade business on Shabbos. So perhaps if you could have a ride with let's say you have a neighbor, a non-Jewish neighbor, who knows, that you're 9 months pregnant, and the neighbor is very forthcoming and very nice and says, "I'll drive you to the hospital." That might be a better option than Uber. Without that, Uber, I think, is the next best. And then only if there's no non-Jewish option available, then the husband can drive his wife to the hospital, need be. But anyway, so to answer your question, the justification for her to get to the hospital to see her doctor is the fact that a woman who's in labor is a chola sheyesh bo sakana.
Even though at the moment she's not in sakana.
Once she is in labor and even suspects that she's going into labor, as you can tell us better than anyone, you have no idea how long it's going to take from the moment she has that first contraction until the baby comes out. So it's not like she knows that she has 24 hours and she could, take a spazier, she could go here, she's got all the time in the world. You have no idea. And therefore you have to be careful.
So just to, again, a recent experience, approximately 4 weeks ago on a Tuesday, my patient arrived at the hospital at 6:58 in the morning and delivered at 7:04. 1 week later, a patient calls me. She's on the way to the hospital. I ask her how far she is from the hospital. She says 12 minutes. I said, I'm 13 minutes. When I got through the door, the security guard who I deliver his baby was waving, go, go, go. I run down to labor and delivery, and the baby is already on her chest. Why? Because she delivered 5 minutes before she got to the hospital in the back of the car. Her husband said to her, what should I do? And she says, just keep driving, just keep driving. It turned out, just as a little laugh, she needed 1 stitch put in. And we laughed. I told her, if you were really good at this, you wouldn't even need 1 stitch. So we all had
there's always next time.
There's always next time. So I totally agree with you. In the end, it comes from above when that baby's coming out.
Yeah. So that's why even in the earliest stages of labor, they're considered a chola sheyesh bo sakana, and they have to take it very seriously on Shabbos as well.
Great. My next question is, that we talked about a little bit, is the doctor. What gives him the right to go to the hospital, or her to go to gives her the right to go to the hospital on Shabbos?
The Gemara says that when it comes to a chola, so it's not just the chola who's able to break Shabbos, but it's anyone who is involved in the care of that chola, even if it's not actively addressing something on the body, but even if you are able to calm the patient down. Again, we're talking about someone in a life-threatening situation. If you are able to calm the patient down, for instance, the Gemara gives a very interesting case. A blind person. The candle for the blind. Exactly. You're a blind person. The person doesn't actually need the candle lit. They can't see either way. Gemara says that someone else is allowed to light the candle because that will make the chola feel better, right? So if that person is able to break Shabbos because they play an active role in the care and hopefully the healing, right, of this patient. So certainly the OBGYN, certainly the doctor who is going to deliver would have a right to travel on Shabbos to meet the patient at the hospital and deliver safely in the hospital and then care to the patient and the baby at that point with whatever they need on Shabbos, that they would still both have a status of a chol sheyesh bo sakana.
Okay, the next person I'm going to talk about is the husband. And from your explanation, we understand the husband whose wife wants him to be there. Okay, but how about a husband whose wife doesn't really care that he's there? For example, there's 5 kids at home, and she prefers that he stays home with the kids, watching the kids.
Right.
But he says, no, I'm coming with you, dear, anyway. Is he allowed to go with her?
In the world of medicine, I think everyone agrees that patient advocacy is critical. I don't think it's wise, and again, nothing against doctors or hospitals, but in general, as a policy, patients should not be coming to the hospital by themselves. And also in transit, how are they getting to the hospital? So let's say you put her in an Uber. You're going to put a woman in labor in an Uber by herself. I mean, you're empowering the Uber driver to be responsible for her in labor. I think that's a horrible, horrible idea. Now, if the question was she's going with her mother.
Let's say her mother's coming with her.
Right. So I think that
I'm just going to give you an example because I was thinking about it. I have a neighbor who about 20 minutes before going to the hospital, it was during the weekday, her husband found out that he had COVID. So he couldn't go. She didn't want him to be there in the hospital with him.
Right.
It's the same example, sort of, if I want you to be home with the kids.
Right. It's a legitimate, that's a legitimate concern, especially if a woman has a certain anxiety that she needs her kids to be cared for. And if the husband goes with her, they're not going to have proper care. I think it's a very valid and reasonable concern that the wife could have.
So I'm saying, if she turns around and says that, is it like sort of usher for him to come?
Yeah.
He wants to go see his newborn baby. She
Right.
wants him to stay home.
His kavana should be that he wants to accompany his wife to be able to give his wife the best care. Now, if by accompanying his wife, he's going to annoy her and he's going to aggravate her because she's not, she doesn't want him there. So it depends. If she's not going to have anyone by her side, I think the husband should insist, because a woman needs a husband there. A woman needs her husband in transit. A woman needs her husband, in the delivery room. That's a no. It's a given.
Okay.
If she has a mother who's accompanying with her, then on Shabbos there's no chiyuv for a husband to go, and therefore your question, he only wants to go to see his baby, but not for the care of his wife. So then that wouldn't justify his traveling on Shabbos.
Okay, so the next person I'll talk about is the mother, the grandmother of the baby.
Right.
Now you have, one other question before we get there about the husband. In reading over some different things on halacha, and I don't really understand it. If Hatzalah comes and picks up this woman and brings her to the hospital, and her husband's in shul, it sounded like it was a lot more difficult for him to get in his car now without the wife in the car and drive to meet her in the hospital. That there were some halachic issues with the separation of the, it's in a different car from a different place than she's going.
That's an interesting question. In transit, we have nothing to worry about.
Her mother took her to the hospital and sent word to shul, I just took your wife to the hospital, come meet us. So he walks home from shul, and now he's getting into his car. He's calling Uber to take himself to the hospital.
If that's the case, no, I didn't understand it like that. If her mother went with her initially, so she has that patient advocate, she has that woman by her side, that person, that individual by her side to take care of her. So then I don't think we would allow the husband to get into a car to go and drive himself to go to the hospital. No, that would not be justified.
Okay. So now again, we have our car with a patient, an Uber with our patient in it, the husband in it, and the patient's mother in it.
Because she was there.
Okay, so we have 3 people in the car. And then there's a doula. Now you have a doula that's coming. Okay, she's also coming from Brooklyn to Long Island. She's not coming with the patient. She's coming separate from the patient. So I want to talk about that. We'll ask you about a Jewish versus a non-Jewish doula. Should you seek out a non-Jewish doula for Shabbos? And then after that, if the patient turned around to ask me, do I need a doula? My answer in a lot of cases would be, I have to tell you from my heart, you don't really need a doula. My nurses are so excellent. And if you speak to my patients, they'll tell you the nurses in our hospital, I don't know why I paid a doula to come. But this nurse was my doula. She was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And now at Shabbos, I know the patient's personality. She doesn't need a doula. It's a Jewish doula driving from someplace else.
Yeah. No,
in other words, I have trouble with this.
Yeah, the doula discussion is an interesting one. It's a relatively new one, I think. No, I mean, have doulas, has been so prevalent in the Jewish community.
I just want to say something. I should be really careful because one of my favorite doulas is listening right now. Okay, she's on with us.
She's on. Okay,
she's on. So thanks to her.
Is my sister-in-law Yael Siegelman one of your favorite doulas? It could be that she is.
She is one of my favorite doulas, but there's a different favorite doula who's here right now. Okay.
So doulas. So doulas they're an interesting. It's an interesting parsha. All I can say. Well, first of all, here's a disclaimer. I've personally never given birth, and my wife has never used a doula, so I've never seen one in action. That being said, people seem to be very into them. They spend money on them. People seem to be very comfortable with them. And you pointed out personality. It might be a personality thing that some women are more comfortable knowing that they have their doula, and other women don't go for it. They don't care. They trust the doctor, the nurses team, and they don't need a doula. It's an extra expense.
There are some patients that really heavily need a doula.
Yeah.
They need somebody to help them through. I'm talking about personality-wise. It is going to make an extreme difference in their experience and their comfort from labor, 100%. But they're also, we see, if a patient turned around to her doula and said, I know it's Shabbos and I don't feel comfortable with you driving, I'll be just fine without you. There are a lot of patients like that also. So they don't turn around to say that to the doula because now our doulas come.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't ask them, they don't look at them different from Shabbos, from the regular week. Should they be looking at them different?
Right. I think let's talk general rules. Yep. If we're dealing with a patient who needs a doula, who is connected with their doula, who will be extra nervous without the doula and will not be able to perform as well as they could. So that is called for this, traveling for the sake of a chola sheyesh b'sakana. Just like I'm not putting them together, but just like the doctor was justified in his driving, the husband was justified in his driving, the doula would be justified in her driving because she is actively participating in the birth and helping this woman who's a chola sheyesh b'sakana.
Sometimes we've seen that she is the most important person to be there.
Yeah. Now, if you'll tell me that this woman who's giving birth couldn't care less, she hired a doula because all of her friends were doing it, but she doesn't care for the doula. She is very happy with her doctor. She's very happy with the nurses. The care that the hospital is providing is just as adequate, if not better, than the doula. I see it's not so easy, not so simple in that case to justify driving to be with that patient. Now there is a middle ground. What happens if they're driving with a guy? They're not driving themselves. They're not doing an Isser D'Oraisa, but they're being driven al yedei guy. That I think is the best option. if a doula can travel to the hospital with a non-Jewish driver, so she's really not violating any deraises, and therefore we don't have to make sure that we justify her travel as, part of the care for the cholesh yesh b'sakana, because even for cholesh ein b'sakana, you're allowed to violate the rabbanos. So this woman in labor is definitely at least the cholesh ein b'sakana. The driving with the nachri, with the Uber driver can certainly be justified. So I think that that's a good policy. Doulas in general, each doula has to speak to their own rav, but doulas in general should get very comfortable with the fact that on a Shabbos delivery, they're looking at cabbing and not driving themselves. Certainly to go back. I don't know if we discussed that yet, but going back, would there be zero justification, very, very little justification to drive back by yourself, but at least al yidei nachri, that should be your, that should be your plan.
So we don't feel that they should have to or try to seek out a non-Jewish doula for Shabbos.
I don't think so. Especially if they have that connection with their doula, that they've developed over the course of the pregnancy. So I don't think so. The last thing I just wanted to mention, just something just popped into my head. That if in fact we're talking about like that patient that you referenced that absolutely needed her doula, she wouldn't be able to do it without the doula, and the doula pulls up her app and she sees there's tremendous a wait list for Uber, and she says, if I don't drive myself, I'm going to miss the labor, and it's going to be horrible for this patient. So then we would even justify her driving just like the doctor. But it has to be case by case, and she has to really know that she's going to a patient who needs her, and it's not just the cherry on top.
Okay. So now we have the patient, the doctor, the husband, the patient's mother, and the doula have all gathered around to help this woman. And we have a nurse from the hospital. I heard there is some issue in having a Jewish nurse who's going to be Mechala Shabbos versus a non-Jewish nurse. Is there any reason that someone should sort of ask that they have a non-Jewish nurse take care of them?
What are we talking about? What type of activity?
The nurse who's going to put in her IV, the nurse who's going to be with her in labor, the nurse who's going to be charting the whole time, and so on.
There's an interesting discussion. There is a Ramah in Shin Chav Ches. In Hilchos Refuah B'Shabbos, the Ramah does say that even if there's a cholesh sheyesh b'sakana, someone whose life is in danger, and they need medical attention, and a deraisa needs to be violated, if there's a non-Jewish person there who is able to do it without compromising the time, the quality of care, etc., the Ramah does recommend that this be carried out with a non-Jewish person. And therefore, if there's a non-Jewish nurse that's not doing anything, active in the, she's not actually being part of the labor. I mean, the nurses, they're at the time they're just charting, which is important. It's critical. They're putting the IV in, so it doesn't have to be done by one specific person. I'm sure the whole nurse team is capable of putting in the IV. Everyone's capable of charting. So if we're not dealing with something which is unique, which is something you need that special, that Jewish person to do it specifically because she could do it better than anyone else. We're just talking about charting or putting in an IV. I definitely think that you would prefer a non-Jewish person to do it over a Jew.
I mean, I don't want to minimize it, but my nurses carry them all the way through labor. They act as doulas, but they're all highly qualified. I work with all of them, and their skill levels are identical.
It doesn't mean that the Jewish person shouldn't be involved in the labor. I'm saying any malacha that has to be carried out. Meaning, coaching a woman through labor there's nothing wrong with that, right? You're not doing anything. I mean, you're not doing any malacha.
They're typing on the computer and putting in the IV, and
so that should be done al yidei nachri.
If we can, that would be preferable.
Yeah. If not, if you don't have, it's a team of Jews, and then someone has to do it. The woman needs to be charted, and an IV needs to go in. So if they're not going to do it, who's going to do it? It needs to be done.
Another person as part of the team is the anesthesiologist. And getting an epidural on Shabbos Are there any issues with, getting an epidural? It's for the comfort of the patient. The patient could exist without it.
Absolutely. And absolutely.
Absolutely, there's no issue.
Absolutely they do it. There's no issue. I mean, the only question into when they do do they draw any blood? Do they have to draw blood before when they put the needle in? Or it's probably it's in the muscle, right? It shouldn't.
There's no blood drawn. There's no blood drawn.
It's going into the back, so it shouldn't. Even
if
blood comes out.
Is there a different point of view of a woman desiring an epidural on Shabbos versus not desiring and having an epidural on Shabbos? There's no Shabbos.
And if I did, I think people would be very upset at me.
I know they would, but I'm still asking the question. If there's anything that we should worry about as patients, getting, listen, it's not obligatory, but it's, something, again, that I think about on Shabbos often.
Yeah, no issue.
Okay. So we're going to turn to the second aspect of tonight. The husband and wife are there. I sent them over Erev Shabbos because of a headache, and I wanted to make sure that they got checked out before Shabbos, got some blood pressures taken, some blood taken, and fully expecting them to go home. They're expecting to go home. There's 5 hours to Shabbos, and they start getting some weird blood pressures, and now they say, you need to stay and have a baby. Right? This is preeclampsia, you shouldn't go home. And now they're there. No suitcase in hand, no wine in hand, no challah in hand, no candles. They're going to go through Friday night, Shabbos, and Shalashudis all the way through Shabbos, and they basically have nothing. So what is the patient to do about Kiddush, about challah, about food, and about candles? Here they have 4 kids at home. There's nothing available to them that they have.
That's why you have to learn the code to the Bikur Cholim room,
if there is one.
Yeah, if there is one.
But also in our hospital, you have to look through an electronic door that either someone has to open for you or you have to open. To get back into the locked unit.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing that precludes you in my hospital from getting to the Bikur Cholim room, but in another hospital that doesn't have a Bikur Cholim room.
Right.
I'm sure you could get a slice of bread, you could get some juice, you could get, some type of food, from the hospital. But what do you do about Kiddush, Lechem Mishnah, and candles? Those are my three questions.
Now I'm remembering, I think one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life was trying to make it from recovery floor down the stairs to the Bikur Cholim room in LIJ I think that was the hardest thing I ever had to do, to try to get there without going through any type of, you couldn't take the elevator because there was no elevator. So, no, there was no stairs. There's no stairs.
The stairs are all locked. There was a back elevator that could, if you stood there, could open, you could get on and get off, but it was, it wasn't optimal halachically to get there and back.
Yeah. And anyway, so to address your question, we have to remember what's the primary concern and what's secondary. Primary is staying healthy, being healthy, having a baby. That's primary. Our secondary concern is Shabbos, Friday night, Kiddush, candles, whatnot. So if you want to go through each one, I don't remember exactly which ones you listed, but let's start with candles. That comes first.
Candles.
So I don't remember if we discussed this last time, but some Rabbanim will allow for the wife to light candles in the hospital room with not actual candles, with the lights above them in the room. Now, most candles mostly every industrial building now, they're using LEDs or fluorescent bulbs or LEDs. Some Rabbanim are opposed to saying a bracha of lahadlik ner shel Shabbos on something which is not an incandescent bulb. But my Rabbi Soloveitchik, Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik's son, he told me that Rabbi Aaron felt very, very comfortable that on Friday night, when the whole nature of the mitzvah of Hadlakas Ner Shabbos is that there should be light in the room and light in the house. So you could even use a fluorescent bulb, you could even use an LED bulb. And therefore, halacha, I tell people if they don't have access to an incandescent bulb, an incandescent light or a flashlight or one of those that sometimes they have these electric tea lights.
Yeah.
So if you don't have access to that, you could even turn the light off in the room, make the bracha and turn it back on. And even if it's a fluorescent or a LED light, and you can make a bracha of Halachic ner shel Shabbos, and that could be your ner Shabbos. It doesn't work for Havdalah, because for Havdalah you need a real eish, so you can't say eish. But for Halachas ner Shabbos, that would work.
Because specifically, they have these little tea light LED lights. There's a box of them in the Bika Cholam room, and it says should not be used for Hadlakas Neras on them.
Yeah. So according to Rav Aaron Solovich, you could use them for ner Shabbos. You cannot use them for Havdalah, but for ner Shabbos, you'd be able to use them. You can't use them for Chanukah either. Chanukah's Chodesh Kislev.
Havdalah is not such a problem, because you could make Havdalah till know, Wednesday or whatever.
Right. Tuesday, yeah. So so that's in terms of lighting. If you don't have, so the people need to eat. So hopefully the hospital has a kosher option, and if they could find themselves, if they could procure some bread, that even if they can't find grape juice, you can make kiddush on mezainis, you can make kiddush on bread.
Okay. So how do you do that? You have a slice of bread in the cellophane. In cellophane that often you find in hospitals, and they give you a slice of bread or even two slices of bread individually wrapped, and that's what you have. So how do you go about making kiddush?
That's your lechem mishnah. You cover them. You make it. So that's your. I don't remember if we discussed this last time, but there's a tshuva from the Meshiv Dover, quotes his grandfather of the Nitziv, quotes his grandfather that 2 slices of bread that were sliced not in front of you, they were sliced before you met this bread. So your whole relationship with this bread is that of full. It's shalom. This is a full piece, a full slice of bread. So we would go, the Minchas Yitzchak Paskins like that lahalacha. So we would go with that. We would say this is lechem mishnah, even though it's not 2 full rolls. It's 2 slices of bread. That's totally fine. You cover them. You make kiddush. You don't end with bori pri hagafen, right? You would wash in this case.
So you wash before making kiddush? Like
the yekis.
I'm saying you wash, then you make kiddush, and then you're off with hamotzi lechem.
And the hamotzi lechem are just like the yekis. The yekis wash before kiddush.
Okay.
That's the German minhag. So that's what you would do. You'd wash, you'd make kiddush. Instead of saying bori pri hagafen, you'd say hamotzi lechem min haaretz, and you break bread.
You're all good to go.
Yeah.
Okay. So my next thing is you showed up in labor on Shabbos morning at 6 a.m. And the husband turns around, was still in labor, and it's noon, and he didn't daven. What davening do you do now?
He missed Shacharis.
Yep.
And he missed Shacharis for a good reason. He was helping his wife, having a baby.
It got intense. She had a C-section. He sat there for complications, and it took, until he finally got done. It was.
Yeah. So the halacha would be he missed Shacharis. Let's assume he missed it completely. He missed Shacharis, missed his man Shacharis. At that point, he would daven mincha. When the Zman mincha comes.
Right.
And when the Zman mincha comes, so instead of davening 1 mincha, he would daven 2 tefillos. He would daven 2 minchas. The first mincha would be mincha. That's the actual mincha that he hasn't yet davened. And then he finishes Shemona Esrei, takes 3 steps back. He waits a few moments, and then he takes another, goes back, and then he takes another 3 steps back, and then forward and davens a second Shemona Esrei. And that second Shemona Esrei is tashlumin for Shacharis. But it has to be in that order. He has to daven the tefillah that you are up to now, and then you daven the second tefillah, which is a makeup for the first.
But it's all a matter of Shemona Esrei, and no other part of davening should he do.
Right. I mean, he missed Kriya Shema. If he wants to say Kriya Shema later, he could. But he missed Kriya Shema. There's a machlokes if a person misses, if he wants to make up other tehillim, that's totally fine. But the main part is the Shemona Esrei. It's important to know if for whatever reason it was a very long labor, and he missed Shacharis and he missed Mincha. Let's say it's a winter month where you don't have too much time.
Right.
So he has to daven Ma'ariv. You can only make up 1. So if he davens Ma'ariv, he then davens Ma'ariv, and he makes up Mincha. He can't make up Shabbos. He lost that. But then again, he didn't lose it because he was negligent. He lost it because he was osik in helping his wife. So that's totally acceptable.
Do you have any issue of him davening in the room with his wife laboring in the same room?
I would not recommend it. I would not recommend davening in the same room as your wife for a few reasons. I wouldn't recommend it because you should daven in a clean place. And what I mean by clean place is that there shouldn't be any women or exposed or anything that's parts of the body which are supposed to be covered shouldn't be exposed. Typically in a hospital room with a woman in labor, it's not the case. So that's number one. And second of all, a person should always daven in an environment that's most conducive to Kavana. I can't think of like almost a worse place to daven in terms of your Kavana than your wife's labor room.
But I can't believe going to the Bikur Cholim room and davening there. You're going to have, like a much higher Kavana because you're just going to be wanting to run back to, to the labor.
True. The truth is, this past, we had a baby in May, and I don't remember which tefillah it was, but one of the tefillahs I had to daven quickly. It was the Shkia was approaching. I forget which one, whatever it was. I really found no good place to daven other than a corner in some like the cafeteria. But even then, I couldn't. You couldn't do it. So it was such a weird situation.
Yeah. So
you put in your ear pod, right? The ear pods, and you, like my father always tells me that's what they used to do. They used to go to the phone booth, pick up the phone, and you daven mincha. And that's what he used to do. The fact that there are no phone booths now is a horrible thing for Yidden that have to daven mincha. So that's what I did. I took my phone, I spoke to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. No one thought that I was crazy because I was on, I had my ear pods in. And that's what you got to do. You got to find a quiet place to daven. But I don't think that the labor room is a good place. But wow, the bedroom is not the best place to daven.
Okay, so now it's Shabbos morning. The baby's delivered. Baby is delivered. And the husband turns to his wife and says, I would like to go to shul. 3 blocks away. I can't figure out a way for him to get down the stairs, out of the hospital, to shul, then come back and get upstairs without 100 shilas along the way. Yeah. Additionally, I heard, and I don't know what the story is, the bracelet that they put on for the baby is not a normal bracelet that, and some would consider that carrying on Shabbos and so on.
Yep.
So you have to make a choice now. You're going to either daven without a minyan, or somehow you're going to finagle your way to shul and back.
Yep. So I'll tell you what I did, because I was in this situation a few times. We had a baby Shabbos Chanukah. 2013. And Shabbos morning, the baby was born. We didn't have, when my wife, we didn't have any, we didn't bring grape juice or challah or anything like that. My wife didn't have a suda. Maybe I had something in the morning before I left, but we didn't have, I don't remember exactly what we had. And the baby was born. I asked one of the nurses to hold off. Don't put the bracelet on me yet. Can I come back later? And then I'll put the bracelet on after I'd already davened. So she agreed. I actually was able to not get the bracelet on. I left, and then I got the bracelet on later because yes, there are machmirim who don't want to go in Rosh Hashanah with the bracelet on. How is it justified to go in general, leaving? So I felt that if you assume that electricity is a shalan d'Rabbanan, if we assume electricity is d'Rabbanan, which not everyone agrees to that, but if you assume electricity is a d'Rabbanan, and you can justify your leaving for a few tzarchei mitzvah, tefillah, right? I wanted to daven with a minyan. I wanted to bring back food so that way we can make kiddush and my wife could have a suda. So the halacha would be that you're allowed to violate a d'Rabbanan, and certainly in this case, it would be Amir L'Nachri, because if you ask a guy to buzz you out,
Right.
so through Amir L'Nachri, for the sake of, which is a double d'Rabbanan, Amir L'Nachri is d'Rabbanan, and you're asking them to do a d'Rabbanan, to unlock the electric door, so the two d'Rabbanans can be justified if you're doing tzarchei mitzvah, going to shul, obtaining provisions for Shabbos, for your Shabbos Sudam. So that would be justified with the double d'Rabbanans of asking a guy to do a d'Rabbanan. If you want to just take a spatzir because it's a nice day and you want to get a nice fresh air, so maybe you'd have to think twice before doing that. Maybe it really wouldn't be justified.
Right.
But if you're doing it for tzarchei mitzvah, I think you can justify the shvus to shvus, the Amir L'Nachri and the d'Rabbanan b'makom mitzvah.
Great. Okay, now I want to turn to a whole different Shabbos issue. And instead of talking about labor and delivery, I want to talk about people who are in the middle of fertility treatments. And Shabbos comes along right in the middle of their fertility treatment. And the first thing that I'm going to talk about, I was just actually discussing this with Dr. Baruch Abitan, who's a fertility doctor. We were discussing about different cases and issues that he's osek in, that arise, and that we have shilas and things that we would like to understand a little bit more. Shots on Shabbos. Okay, so these patients are not in sakana, but they're in the middle of fertility treatments. And the first one we're going to talk about is egg retrievals. So prior to IVF. So they're getting shots for IVF stimulation. For example, a 30-year-old that's been trying for greater than 1 year, she already failed one IVF cycle. Now she's getting shots morning and night for 8 to 10 days, subcutaneous shots, so it has to cross over Shabbos. She might actually be receiving a trigger shot, be told that she needs to take a trigger shot on Friday night based on her results for egg retrieval on Sunday. So we have the issue of getting sub-Q shots, and also things, you can't change the time of when she needs to get her trigger shot. So it has to be after Shabbos starts in this case.
Right. There is a machlokes about shots. What's the best approach? Taking a shot on Shabbos. So the most important, I think the most important point is that the shots, I don't think, are a violation of any deraisa. And the reason why they're not a violation of deraisa, because the deraisa would be drawing blood. Here, it's not an intravenous, shot. Where they're going into, it's intramuscular. It's not going to draw blood. Even if the blood.
Is there a difference between a subcutaneous shot? Because the next one I was going to ask you about an intramuscular shot. We don't see any difference.
Typically not. There's no. You're not drawing any blood.
No.
If some blood comes out, so that's what we call a davar she'eino miskavin. It wasn't inevitable, right? It wasn't inevitable. It's very possible you could take the shot and no blood will come out whatsoever. Therefore, even if some blood does come out, that's okay, since your kavana, your intention was not to draw blood, and it's very feasible and possible that the blood's not going to come out, so therefore it would be mutter on Shabbos to take the shot.
Well, just to interrupt, when we do give that shot, we do pull the plunger back to make sure we're not intervascular. We're not in a vessel when we give that shot. So the idea is to give it intramuscular. We make sure we're not in a vessel by accident, and with intention to pull back to make sure there's no blood, and then we give the shot.
Yeah,
just to be clear.
Yeah. I mean that could be, but that's typically not when a woman is doing the fertility shots. I don't think that they're doing that. They're just going in and they're giving it the shot.
Uh-huh.
There is this assembling of the needle, right? That's all. The needle often has to be assembled on Shabbos. Now, if they can assemble it before Shabbos, that's wonderful. Sometimes they don't want to do that because they don't want to compromise the sterile environment. They want to keep it as sterile and as clean as possible. I generally tell people that it's mutter to rip the packaging with a shinui, try not to rip any words. If you try to assemble it some type of irregular manner, some type of shinui, that would also be acceptable. And
most of the packaging is a pull-apart packaging.
okay, what do you call it?
Yeah, is not
what are they?
alcohol.
The alcohol rub. So that try to rip it without a shinui, with a shinui, try to rip it, don't rip any letters. And then it's fine. There are some poskim, I'll just let you know, there are some poskim that recommend that you find a non-Jewish nurse to do the shots on Shabbos. That you should have a non-Jewish person doing the shots. There are some Rabbanim who subscribe to that. If it's possible, if you have access to a non-Jewish person, and it's not too burdensome to have them do it, and it's comfortable for you, so that's wonderful. Often that's not the case. Often they don't have access. It's embarrassing and difficult to obtain one, and therefore halacha we allow the Jew to do it themselves, or to have a nurse or even the husband do it for them, whatever the case is. But they should be careful to try to do everything with the shinui and not to and obviously not to draw blood.
The next, number 2, what I want to talk about is retrieval of the egg on Shabbos. And I think people who are OSEC in this field will find that there are some fertility doctors that are not as sensitive as maybe they should, and things end up that they need or insist or tell the patient, you need to have this retrieval done on Shabbos. This is the only time that you could do it. There's also some times where it cannot be moved. It turns out that way unintentionally, unprovoked, but that egg, they want to do the retrieval on Shabbos. So we talk about the issues of travel, consent, sedation with propofol and Valium, transvaginal egg retrieval, and then eventually the return home, all taking place or possibly taking place on Shabbos. How does a patient go about doing that halachically?
So what we do with PUA is we are in communication with the doctor, and the first order of business is to try to really understand how integral is the Shabbos retrieval. Often it's a spectrum. There's a window of time. It's very rare to find that the retrieval must be done at Saturday morning from between the hours of 9:30 and 12 in the afternoon. It's very hard to find such a case. It's usually a spectrum, and the spectrum can be tilting towards different directions. It could be a Friday-Saturday window. It could be a Saturday-Sunday window. And I'll often have a conversation with the doctors and discuss this particular patient's case and say, Doc, does it really need to be on Shabbos? Can we retrieve them on Friday? And often the doctor will say, yeah, we could do a Friday retrieval. Or often the doctor could say, yeah, I'll give him one more day and we can retrieve them on Sunday. If that's the case, then we'll definitely have the patient go in on Friday or on Sunday for the retrieval. Very rarely, it's happened, but very rarely does the doctor say, no, this patient needs to be retrieved on Shabbos. Nothing to talk about. So there, if that's the case, so we try to be as careful as we can and try to do everything as possible, as many things as possible, but al yidei a non-Jewish doctor. So if we could have the non-Jewish nursing staff, non-Jewish doctor doing the retrieval, if they have to travel on Shabbos, often they'll choose to stay nearby. But if they have to travel, they'll be traveling with a guy, right? It's hard to justify any malacha d'oraisa for fertility treatment. Again, when we spoke about labor, so a woman who's in labor is a chola sheyesh bo sakana, totally different category. Here, it's most probably either a chola she'ein bo sakana, or something called sakanas aver, where they have one aver which is not functioning. They have their uterus, the ovaries, etc., are not functioning well, or the zera, whatever it is, it's not functioning well. That's another category in halacha. Sakanas aver also allows for a non-Jew, but it doesn't allow for, typically speaking, for a deraisa. So if the retrieval needs to be done on Shabbos, we'll often allow it. However, it has to be done. We try to set up as many non-Jewish people along the way that can take care of the various steps.
So I just want to very straight out comment how in these cases, a advocate is integral, and being involved with Rabbanim and Pua, Bonei Olam is essential in these cases, because it's very easy for a doctor to tell a patient, you need to be here on Shabbos morning, and they're going to listen to what the doctor says. But like you said, when you speak to the doctor on behalf of the patient, often that's not really what has to happen. That may be preferable, it may be this, it may be that, but it doesn't what have to happen. So I'm gonna be a commercial for PUA and being involved in PUA, because you could see how this could turn into a halachic disaster if you're not.
Yeah. And kudos to the firm doctors. I'll tell you, this past week, Heshi
Yes.
Lehman, Dr. Lehman, who works in Montefiore in the Bronx, and he has an office in Hartsdale. So he had a Jewish patient, and he was stimulating them in the beginning of the week. And he called me and he said, "Listen, I'm seeing that it looks like I'm going to be. Looks like Shabbos might be an issue. Let me know how to go about this, because I can stim them one more day, and then we can push it off to Sunday. But I need to know now." So we went through it, and yeah, I don't remember if they ended up doing it on Thursday or pushed it off, but the foresight and the sensitivity from the doctor's perspective was integral. So absolutely, it's teamwork.
Next time you speak to him, tell him I say hi. We went to high school together, and a very fond relationship. So send him my regards.
Dr. Lehman's a good guy. I definitely will.
Okay, I want to read an email to you. Hi, Dr. Herman, just for your comments. I started on progesterone and an injection of Avidril, and then the nurses emailed me saying that the transfer would be scheduled for Shabbos. We were a little nervous and called our Rav. Our Rav asked whether or not the doctor was Jewish and asked us which malachas would be performed on Shabbos. The doctor did end up being Jewish, but after much back and forth, our Rav gave us the go-ahead. We had all the papers signed before Shabbos. The elevator was pressed for us. We stayed in a hotel right near the doctor and were able to walk there. Our mashgiach also stayed in a nearby hotel, and it really worked out super well.
Yeah. Well, Hashem. Yeah, absolutely. But again, from my experience, there are very few cases that really need to be done on Shabbos.
So we'll keep that in mind. Number 3, monitoring on Shabbos. So now the egg is retrieved and the IVF is performed, and the doctors recommend daily sonograms and daily blood work, or else they might miss the proper time for the IVF.
This would be before the retrieval. So the question would be before the retrieval, when they're stimming before the retrieval.
Right.
So that's a good question.
So and we're talking about sonograms on Shabbos and blood work on Shabbos.
Yeah. So that's a good question, because there you really need to know how the body is responding to the medication in order to do the retrieval on the right day. We really need to know. We need to know how the body's how the follicles are developing, how the body is responding, and the way that we do that is through blood work and through sonograms. So here's my approach. I tell often the patient will call. They'll call Pua, they'll call me, whatever it is. The doctor said I have to come in on Shabbos morning for ultrasound and for blood work. So often a patient does not need to be monitored through ultrasound on Saturday. They can do one on Friday and they can do it on Sunday. But the blood work is very critical. They really do need the blood work. Therefore, we have a service of phlebotomist that comes to the house of the patient, wherever that patient lives, a non-Jewish nurse. The nurse draws blood in the morning, hand delivers the blood to the lab by whatever time the lab says they want that blood there. We make sure that they have all the blood that they need on time to run the tests. Then they have a non-Jewish nurse or whoever from their team will call it, send a text message to the patient. The patient will leave their phone on, so it doesn't go off. The patient will leave the phone on. We'll get a text message if they need to trigger, for instance. Sometimes it's not relevant, but sometimes they need to know whether to take the trigger shot now. So they're waiting for the lab to get back to them. But this is a service that Pooh offers. All you do is call Pooh. I think when you call the main number, one of the prompts is Shabbos blood work. Press 4 for Shabbos blood work. You'll be sent to a dedicated line for someone who oversees the Shabbos blood work department, and they'll set it up with your address, the time, the lab, wherever you're going, and we'll make sure that that doesn't need to happen. Why is it so important? Because a blood draw is a shayla d'oraisa. So we don't want you to draw your blood, or we don't want you to even have to have a Jew one of the nurses do it. We make sure that we send you a non-Jewish nurse who will draw the blood and deliver it on time, and you'll get your results. You don't have to go in on Shabbos.
And you just touched on the last thing that we're going to talk about tonight, which is the time-sensitive call and instructions on Shabbos. Is the patient supposed to go to their phone every 20 minutes and refresh and go see if there's a text message? I don't know if you know about my phone. I mean, I get a dozen or 2 dozen every 10 minutes.
Yeah. If you're in the medical field and you're on call, so you have to be responsive. You have to be. Here
we're talking about the patient waiting for those results to come back.
So it depends. Meaning, if they need to know what to do and it's very time sensitive, so then I would recommend leaving. There is an option on the phone to leave it lit, so the phone doesn't go off.
Yep.
And then the text message will pop up if you can have them text you, and then that's the best. If there needs to be communication, so again, like we've discussed, so a phone call is a d'Rabbanan. And therefore, if this is something which is very important for the cycle of this patient who is a chola she'ein bo sakana, it can be justified. But if we could find cool ways to circumvent the usage of electricity, such as leaving the phone on and having the messages just appear, that would be the best.
Just a very side question. We're done with Shabbos. We're done with fertility.
Oh.
Actually, we're not done with Shabbos. Very often, my partners are wonderful to me. They say, Shabbos is important to you, and we'll take care of Shabbos for deliveries. And I said to them, thank you so much, but please know I'm around if you get very tired, if you can't do it, if you get overworked, let me know, call me before shul, or call me after shul. No, I'm going to shul, if you need me. And often I know before Shabbos that they're going to have a very difficult time. So I have the urge to go look and make sure I didn't miss a call, miss a text, because my patients, again, are in sakana.
Do you wear your phone on you?
I don't, unless you tell me that your wife might go into labor this Shabbos, and
if you're expecting one of your patients to go into labor.
No, but here is the case is I'm expecting 10 patients to go into labor, but my partner said they will handle it.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you that it's an undue burden. They're up all night. They can't stay up all night. They can't stay up all day. I have a suspicion that they're going to need my help. I come home from shul and I have this big urge to go upstairs and look at my text to make sure I didn't miss a call. How do I figure out if I could just go and check to make sure?
And let me ask you a question. If you see a missed call, you know it's an emergency. You know that they wouldn't call you if it wasn't an emergency.
95%. Every once in a while, someone makes a mistake. But
where do we keep the extra tissues?
Yeah. But there have been times that I just need to check my phone to see. I don't have anything specific, but I have a suspicion that they're going to need my help. I'll just give you an example, which is a common one. We have twins that we're going to deliver vaginally, with one's head down and the other one is breech. So I know he'll do it without me, but in general, during the week, it's like, call me. So we're both there together. 2 heads are better than one. And right. I have a suspicion that this is going to happen. So I'm putting in a position that during the week, I would be there.
Yeah. I think it's well. I think under those circumstances, you're allowed to.
I'm
When
not
you're
just,
in the house, you walk around with your phone on your pocket or no? You
no,
leave it
it's left by my bed. I leave it by my bed.
unloud.
But we know this patient's impending labor, and knowing that if the baby's upside down, if it was Thursday, I would be joining him for sure. I don't know. I
Because
didn't hear
because
anything.
it's better for because you're providing care for the patient,
I'm
right?
also, the truth is, providing care for my partner who's
Who's providing care for the
the
patient?
patient.
I think it's mutter.
Yeah.
I think after shul, if you, especially with the shinoi, if your phone, if the phone is off, and all you need to do is kind of just like
Tap to
just
see if there's a call.
tap it with your knuckle. If by tapping it with your knuckle, if you could leave it on the whole Shabbos, that's wonderful.
Yeah. So every once in a while, I come home from shul, I have a discussion with my wife, like, should I go or shouldn't I go? Like, this is what's going on. We have a discussion.
I definitely think that is justified, 100%.
Yeah.
You could turn the phone on so it's always on.
Yeah.
So that way you'll be able to always check.
I'm gonna see better if I could leave it lit. I haven't.
Yeah.
Right. I'm looking at it right now. It just shows I have texts and emails. It doesn't tell me what they are. Let me see if I could do that. Okay, so just to end off for tonight, this ends our conversation on Shabbos. Upcoming, we are going to have a discussion about induction of labor. And then what I think is the hardest topic of all, once somebody is in nida in labor. And then finally, although I wanted to start with this topic, I want to get to the minhagim and customs that we have. Maybe like to explore a little bit where they come from, what's important and what's not so important, and work that through.
Great.
And obviously, if anybody has any other ideas of topics that we should do, we of course will entertain them and try to get those done.
I want to point out, someone sent me on the chat that this was relevant. It was relevant to the discussion about a Jewish nurse and a Jewish doula. It seems like from people's experiences, having Jewish doulas and Jewish staff is not just an added plus, but it's actually quite important for the care of the patient. The Jewish staff takes better care of their Jewish patient. They understand their needs better than some of the non-Jewish staff, and that really goes into the overall care for a cholish yesh b'sakana is something which is absolutely significant. So you had asked whether it's for Shabbos, do you ask a non-Jewish doula? It seems like from people's experience. I mean, we said before you don't have to, but just to reiterate that point, even from personal experience with someone on this chat. They said it's absolutely significant and halachically, imperative that there is a Jewish doula there caring for the patient.
And I think from my heart, I could agree with that. There are aspects certainly that are enhanced by having an understanding person who really understands the ins and outs of what we need.
Good.
I see just a little bit something at the bottom popped up now.
Okay, so about measuring. Okay, measuring with tzarich mitzvah is also mutter. Measuring for refuah is mutter. So if you have to measure, so if you can try to do it, if you could eyeball it, that's always the thing we say. If you could eyeball it, fine, but sometimes you can't, and there's nothing you can do about it. You have to be careful. You have to make sure that you're giving yourself the right dosages.
Okay, I also see a little message from my great pal, Dr. Tal Kantor, who I work with and love to work with. What if there's a Jewish nurse who is working on Shabbos? Is it better that she seeks out the Jewish patient to work with, if she has a choice between working for a Jewish patient or a non-Jewish patient?
Yeah, absolutely.
Seems very reasonable.
I think absolutely, yeah.
Dr. Newman wanted us to mention that Hatzalah in the 5 towns, they have, and I know this, they have coupons, an arrangement with the car service in the 5 towns, that the patients get a coupon. They could call the local taxi and just give them the coupon, and they will transport them to and from the hospital.
Yeah,
it's a very nice thing that we have here.
Yep. Yeah.
So he wants to know, is that better than Uber? Hatzalah has arranged a voucher that the taxi will
It's
take you
fine.
for free. Is it better than taking an Uber that there's a transaction going on?
Maybe that's better.
Okay, something to consider.
Yeah.
Okay,
I
everybody.
presume it's as fast and as
Yes,
as
it's
quick.
local, it's fast. It should be just fine. They've been doing it for years, so they understand what they're doing.
Yeah, no, sounds that's a good plan.
Okay, I
Yeah,
think that's
Shakov to you.
good. And we hope to be back within the month.
Ibez Hashem. Yeah.
Thank God for the busy schedules. Coordinating is a little bit difficult, but
We'll send out the flyers. We'll send out the flyers in the same mediums, the same emails, whatnot.
Yep.
All the best.
Good. Be well.
Take care.